we know more about America's nuclear weapons, where they are and what they do, than we do about America's gold. I mean, that's one angle to that. But along came Roosevelt in 1933, and then, you know, he had this Congress that was totally with him, you know, and he passed the National Industrial Recovery Act, which was this agreement, this model of governance between, you know, the government and between big industry, and you know, with a lot of organized labor thrown in there.
Today we would call fascism, right?
Yeah, well, it's the one technical term for it is called syndicalism, which is a Marxian term, and it's the next step of late stage capitalism, syndicalism, and syndicalism is the root of fascism. I mean, if you get into the whole political philosophy of it. And then along came the Supreme Court and struck down a bunch of these things that Roosevelt was doing. You know, the Schechter poultry case, you know, it was couple little Jewish merchants in like Brooklyn or something who were selling chickens, and they got in trouble with the federal government over their chickens. Schechter Poultry was the name of the case. I'm like, you know, the chicken case, you know, but it threw out the National Industrial Recovery Act, and it really made Roosevelt mad.
And that went all the way to the Supreme Court.
To the U.S. Supreme Court, Schechter Poultry, very famous, Schechter, look it up. And when that happened, Roosevelt said, "Oh, I think we should pack." He didn't say pack the court. He said we should rearrange the court. The Judiciary Act of 1937 meant that he's going to be able to appoint extra justices to the court. It was 9 justices. You know, he's going to appoint some more, and that it became popularly known as the court packing case. Now, where did we get 9 justices from? Well, that goes back, you know, 150 years or so. You know, the Constitution, it says that, you know, there shall be a Supreme Court, and it mentions a Chief Justice, but in terms of how many other justices and what they do, where they sit, you know, the building that they have, that was all added on, you know, years later. You know, the U.S. Supreme Court building in Washington that we think of as the Supreme Court, well, that building was built in the 1920s out of, you know, white marble. Before that, the Supreme Court sat in the basement of the U.S. Capitol, and before there was a Capitol, they were just a bunch of, you know, circuit riding judges, you know, who would meet in Philadelphia, or they'd meet in New York, or they'd meet in wherever, you know, in the early days of the U.S. Republic. But so along came Roosevelt to pack the court, and that was among other, that was one of the most unpopular things that Franklin Roosevelt did. I mean, he got blowback from his own party and everything, and it's really something that here we are, you know, do the math, 85 years later, you know, or 83 years later, 1937 to 2020, and we're talking about it again. Yeah. I mean, it's like 4 generations. It's that whole fourth turning thing. Every 80 years, everybody's died off, and enough people have forgotten their history that we do stupid things all over again. And this whole thing where they say, well, you know.
Well, that was one of the themes that Bill and I wrote about in Financial Reckoning Day and I.O.U.S.A. is that we, like in science and things like that, we learn from like doing experiments, and then there's like a physical progression to new knowledge. But in politics and in love, really, we make the same mistakes over and over again because we never actually learn from history.
No, I mean, it's there to be studied, and it's there to be read. But another packing situation that could go on right now, that could happen depending on the political outcome of the election, is the U.S. Senate. I mean, the House has already passed a bill to bring the District of Columbia in as a state. And there's always this penumbra, I guess I'd call it, of should we bring Puerto Rico in as a state? Well, that would, if you know, come next year, if we have a Democrat president, a Democrat House, and a Democrat Senate, you may very well see Puerto Rico come in as a state, and the House of Representatives, or the District of Columbia come in as a state. You know, 2 new states. 4, absolutely no question about it, Democrat senators, and it would be probably 4 new members of Congress until they do an entire reorganization of redistricting. Theoretically, under the laws written, we could have not 335 members of the House of Representatives. We could have 340 for a few years until the 2020 census gets redistributed. You know, California would lose a seat. New York would lose.
I think that's part of what's interesting to me is like we learn from history that there are a certain number of people in Congress. There are a certain number of Supreme Court justices,
right.
But none of that's written down anywhere. It's
it's
the way that we go. And then when we get into political environments like we're in right now, and there's movements that are in place that could change all of that. That's part of what I want to talk to you about today. So I have this book right here. It's called The Roots of American Order, and it was written by Russell Kirk. Russell Kirk lived in Minnesota in like the 50s and 60s, and he was a Edmund Burke scholar. And Edmund Burke was an Irish guy who was part of Parliament, and he was the only member of Parliament in his time, it was like the 1750s, who supported the colonies and ultimately ended up supporting the American Revolution. And Russell Kirk was a scholar of his, and this is his most famous work, but he wrote this whole book about how we came to the ideas that not only gave us the institutions that we're talking about right now, but also like the idea of personal liberty, free markets, like they go all the way back to pre-written times.